Let me tell you about a massive shift happening right now in how America thinks about its future in the air and in space. We're watching a crucial moment where military leaders are being forced to completely rethink how they'll fight wars in the coming decades. And it all centers around some pretty dramatic statements from the Air Force's top civilian leader just days before he leaves office. Let's start with Frank Kendall, the outgoing Secretary of the Air Force. He's about to hand over the keys to the next administration, but before he does, he's dropping what amounts to a warning shot about America's military future. And to understand why this matters so much, we need to look at what's happening with one of the most expensive military programs in history. Right now, the Air Force is at a crossroads. They've got this incredibly ambitious program called NGAD, Next Generation Air Dominance. It's supposed to be America's next super advanced fighter jet, the thing that'll keep the United States ahead of China and Russia in the skies. But here's the catch. It's getting incredibly expensive. We're talking about $20 billion just to develop it. And Kendall's basically saying, look, maybe we need to think about this differently. Instead of this ultra-expensive new jet, he's floating the idea of something more practical, what he calls an F-35 follow-on. Think of it like this: instead of building a completely new iPhone from scratch, maybe you just make a better version of the one you already have. It's cheaper, it's faster, and it might actually be more useful. But this isn't just about fighter jets. Kendall's looking ahead to 2050, and what he sees is pretty eye-opening. He's just released this report, the Department of the Air Force in 2050, and it paints a picture of warfare that looks more like science fiction than anything we've seen before. Let's break down what he's seeing in this future. First, space. Kendall's saying something that might surprise a lot of people. By 2050, space isn't just going to be important for military operations. It's going to be the deciding factor. Think about that for a second. The country that controls space will control everything else. That's why he's calling for what he describes as a much bigger, much more powerful Space Force. Right now, the Space Force has about 10,000 people. They call them Guardians. But Kendall's saying that by 2050, we're going to need multiples of that number. And they're not just going to be sitting around monitoring satellites. They're going to be operating space-based weapons, running automated systems that track enemy movements, and managing an entire network of space-based surveillance. Here's where it gets really interesting. Kendall's not just making these predictions because he thinks technology is cool. He's doing it because he's watching what China is doing. They're moving fast. Really fast. They're developing new weapons, new ways of fighting, and they're especially focused on space. And Kendall's basically saying, if we don't transform how we think about air and space power, we're going to fall behind. Kendall's talking about a fundamental shift in how wars might be fought. He's describing a future where artificial intelligence plays a massive role, where unmanned aircraft are just as important as planes with pilots, and where the line between air and space operations basically disappears. We are evolving toward a remote control war, he writes in his report. Think about what that means. The pilot sitting in a cockpit, the soldier on the ground. They might not be the main characters in future conflicts. Instead, it could be the person operating a swarm of drones from thousands of miles away, or the Guardian managing a network of space-based weapons. This is where we need to pause and think about what this means for the people actually serving in the military. The Air Force has this incredible history and culture built around pilots. These are the Top Gun folks, the ones who've been the heroes of military aviation for generations. But Kendall's saying something pretty radical here, that culture might need to change. The culture and history of the Air Force is about the role of the pilot, Kendall says. Letting go of that is an incredibly difficult, emotional thing for people to do, but he's suggesting that's exactly what might need to happen. All of this is happening against a backdrop of increasing tension with China. They're not just building up their military, they're specifically designing it to challenge the United States, especially in space and in the air, and they're moving fast. Remember that sixth-generation fighter jet that China recently showed off, the one with the double delta wing design? That wasn't just for show, it was a message. We're not playing catch-up anymore. But here's the thing that makes all of this complicated: money. The US military budget is already massive. We're talking about $853 billion for 2023. That's more than the entire economy of some countries. And a lot of that money is already committed to existing programs like the F-35, which is going to cost about $2 trillion over its lifetime. So when Kendall talks about needing to transform the Air Force and build up this much more powerful Space Force, he's also talking about having to make some really tough choices. You can't fund everything. Something's got to give. That's why his suggestion about the F-35 follow-on instead of NGAD is so significant. It's not just about one aircraft program. It's about how the military needs to think differently about spending money and developing new capabilities. Maybe instead of always trying to build the most advanced thing possible, sometimes it makes more sense to build something that's good enough and can actually be delivered on time and on budget. And all of this is happening right now at a crucial moment. Kendall's about to leave office. The next administration will have to decide what to do with all of these recommendations. They'll have to figure out how to balance the need to modernize with budget constraints, how to keep up with China while not breaking the bank, and how to transform these military services without losing what makes them effective. This isn't just about military technology or budget numbers. It's about how the United States sees its role in the world, how it plans to maintain its position as a global superpower, and how it's going to adapt to a future where the rules of warfare are being completely rewritten. The decisions being made right now about fighter jets, about space capabilities, about artificial intelligence, they're going to shape what the US military looks like for decades to come. And as Kendall heads out the door, he's making it clear the old ways of doing things might not be enough anymore. The future of warfare is going to look very different from its past, and the country that adapts first is going to have a massive advantage. As we watch all of this unfold, it's worth remembering that these aren't just abstract policy decisions. They're choices that will affect thousands of service members, influence global stability, and ultimately help determine whether the United States can maintain its military edge in a world that's becoming increasingly competitive and dangerous. The next few years are going to be crucial. Will the US make the investments and changes Kendall says are necessary? Will it be able to transform its air and space forces quickly enough to keep up with China? And perhaps most importantly, will it be able to do all of this while maintaining the things that have made its military successful for so long? These are the questions that military leaders, politicians, and the next administration will have to grapple with. And as Kendall heads out the door, he's made it clear the answers to these questions might determine a lot more than just the future of the Air Force and Space Force. They might determine the future of American military power itself. The stakes couldn't be higher. And as we move forward into this uncertain future, one thing is clear: the decisions being made right now are going to echo for decades to come. The question isn't whether the US military will change, it's how fast it can change, and whether that change will be enough to meet the challenges that lie ahead.